The Georgian Terrace Hotel sparkles with crystal lights, but it cannot hide the cold, proud hearts of the guests. Julian Mercer publicly stomps on Zora's rare plant and kicks her out of his birthday party. He chooses fake success over their 18 months of love. Zora is actually the heir to a billion-dollar shipping company, only wanting to test his love before revealing her true self. Without a single complaint, she calmly walks away, with her head lawyer, who has just arrived to protect her. She begins a journey to get justice and prove her true worth. What hard challenges are waiting for her on the road ahead? How will Julian fall apart when he finds out the truth? 3 months before, that night, Zora Bennett stood in a cramped Atlanta apartment kitchen, watering a small orchid. The plant was called a star of Assam, a rare white flower, with purple veins running through each petal. Her mother had given her the seedling 9 years ago, 2 weeks before she passed away from heart failure. Zora carried it through 4 apartments and 2 cities, never letting it die. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary houseplant worth maybe $40 at a nursery. To Zora, it was the last living thing her mother ever touched. She worked as a marketing assistant at a small firm downtown, earning $51,000 a year. Nobody at her job knew her last name was tied to Bennett Pacific Shipping, a company worth $3,700,000,000. Her father, Richard Bennett, had built the company from 2 rusted cargo ships in 1987. Zora had walked away from the family name at 22, wanting to build a life nobody could buy for her. She used her mother's maiden name, Hale, at work and with friends. Only her father and one lawyer knew where she really lived. Growing up, Zora spent summers on cargo ships, watching workers load steel containers. She remembered the smell of diesel fuel mixing with salt air near the Savannah docks. Her father taught her to read shipping manifests before she learned to read regular books. Her mother, Elena, taught her something different: how to notice people, not just numbers. Watch how someone treats a waiter, Elena used to say. That tells you everything. Zora carried that lesson everywhere, long after her mother's voice had gone quiet. At 19, Zora attended a private boarding school where classmates already knew her family's worth. Boys asked her to dances because of her last name, not because they liked her laugh. Girls invited her to parties, then whispered about her behind polished bathroom doors. She learned early that money made people either too close or too distant, rarely just right. By the time she left for college, she wanted something simpler than constant attention. She wanted to be chosen for herself, not for a number attached to her name. That lawyer was Diane Cole, a sharp woman in her 50s who had worked for the Bennett family for 18 years. Diane checked on Zora every single week, usually with a short phone call. Any man asking too many questions about your money? Diane always asked first. Zora always laughed and said no, because for 18 months, there had been no reason to worry. She met Julian Mercer at a coffee shop on Peachtree Street, spilling latte on his shoes by accident. Julian was 29, tall, with a jaw that looked carved from stone and a laugh that filled a room. He worked in commercial real estate, chasing deals that never quite closed the way he bragged about. He told her stories about penthouse sales and 7-figure commissions that never seemed to arrive in his bank account. Zora liked him anyway, because he made her laugh until her stomach hurt. She told him her name was Zora Hale, and that she worked in marketing. She never lied about loving him. She only left out one detail. For 18 months, they built something that felt steady and warm. Julian met her for lunch on Tuesdays. He remembered she hated cilantro on her tacos. He held her hand during scary movies and never once made fun of her small apartment. Zora began to believe she had found a man who loved her, not her family's money. She started planning the moment she would finally tell him the truth. She wanted to choose the right time, a quiet dinner, maybe a walk through Piedmont Park. She never got the chance. There was one night, 7 months into dating, when Julian almost saw the truth. Diane called while they were eating dinner, and Zora stepped outside to answer. Julian caught only a few words through the window: the board meeting and your father's shares. When Zora came back inside, he asked who she had been talking to. Just my aunt, Zora said quickly. She handles some family paperwork for us. Julian nodded and let it go, never once asking a single follow-up question. Looking back, Zora would wonder if that had been a small test, one he failed quietly. Julian also had his own secrets tucked beneath his easy smile. He told Zora he was closing a deal worth $200,000 in commission. The deal was real, but the commission was smaller, only $11,000 after fees. He needed people to see him a certain way, successful, rising, untouchable. Zora never asked about his money. She simply liked spending time with him. She never once suspected that his confidence was built on borrowed foundations. Julian's 29th birthday fell on a Saturday in October, and he wanted a real party this year. His father had once worked as a hotel manager, and Julian grew up watching wealthy guests check in and out. He always swore that one day he would be the one being served, not the one serving. This year, he rented the Grand Ballroom at the Georgian Terrace Hotel, a historic building near Fox Theater. The cost was $18,000 for $100, money he did not actually have. He put it on 3 different credit cards and told himself he would figure out the rest later. He invited coworkers, old college friends, and several men from a private investment club downtown. These men managed money for Atlanta's wealthiest families, and Julian desperately wanted to join their circle. He told them he was dating a woman named Zora, described only as someone from marketing. He never mentioned her last name. He barely thought about it at all. What Julian did not know was that 2 men from that same investment club managed funds for Bennett Pacific Shipping. They had seen Zora's photograph once at a private company gala 3 years earlier. The night of the party, Zora wore a simple green dress she had bought 2 years before. It was not designer. It did not need to be. She brought the star of Assam orchid as a gift, wrapped carefully in brown paper. She thought it would mean something, a piece of her real life shared with him at last. She planned to tell Julian everything that night after the party quieted down. She wanted him to know her completely before any lawyer or company name got involved. The ballroom glowed, with hundreds of small string lights hung across the ceiling. A jazz trio played near the bar, and the smell of grilled shrimp drifted from silver serving trays. Perfume and cologne mixed together in the air, sharp and expensive, and slightly overwhelming. Under the music, air conditioning vents hummed a low, steady note that nobody noticed. Zora walked in holding the wrapped orchid against her chest like something precious. Julian was standing near the bar, with 3 men in tailored navy suits. Their shoes clicked against the marble floor, with every small movement, sharp and deliberate. One man wore a watch that cost more than Zora's entire yearly salary. Julian saw her approaching, and his smile flickered, just for a second, before he waved her over. "This is Zora," he said to the men. "She's in marketing." His voice carried a strange, careful tone, like he was introducing an intern, not a girlfriend. One of the men, a broad-shouldered investor named Preston Locke, studied her simple dress. "Marketing where?" Preston asked, his eyes moving slowly down and back up. Zora answered honestly, naming the small firm where she worked downtown. Preston's mouth curled slightly, and he turned back to Julian, without responding to her at all. Zora felt her face grow warm, but she stayed quiet and steady, just like always. She held out the wrapped orchid to Julian. "Happy birthday," she said softly. "This one means a lot to me." Julian took the package, distracted, glancing at Preston to see if he was still watching. He unwrapped it quickly, careless, and looked down at the small white flower. "A plant," he said, and something ugly crossed his face. "You got me a houseplant?" Preston laughed, a short, sharp bark, and the other men chuckled along with him. Julian's jaw tightened. A thin vein pulsed once at his temple. He glanced around the ballroom, feeling every eye he imagined was watching him. In that moment, Julian Mercer decided his birthday party mattered more than 18 months of love. "Everyone brings something real," he said, his voice rising. "You bring me dirt in a pot." Zora's chest tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "It belonged to my mother," she said quietly. "I don't care whose it was," Julian snapped. "This is embarrassing." He set the orchid down hard on a nearby table, and the ceramic pot cracked along one side. Then, without thinking, he stepped forward and pressed his shoe down onto the flower itself. The stem snapped with a small, wet sound, barely audible under the music. Petals scattered across the white tablecloth like broken glass. For one full second, nobody in the small circle around them said a single word. Zora stared at the crushed flower, her throat suddenly tight and dry. Her hands did not shake. Her eyes did not fill with tears, not yet. Something inside her simply went very still, the way water goes still before it freezes. Julian, embarrassed by his own outburst, turned it into something worse. "You know what? Just go home," he said loudly. "This isn't the place for you tonight." A few guests nearby had stopped talking, their drinks frozen halfway to their mouths. The jazz trio kept playing, unaware, 3 feet away from the sudden silence. "Julian," Zora said, her voice low and even. "Please don't do this in front of everyone." "Don't do what?" he said, louder now, playing to the small crowd gathering closer. "I'm doing you a favor. You clearly don't belong here." He reached out and gripped her elbow, steering her toward the ballroom doors. Zora did not fight him. She simply let her feet move where he pushed them. Preston Locke watched, with a satisfied smirk, arms crossed over his expensive jacket. "Some people just don't know how to dress for these things," Preston said to nobody in particular. Julian laughed at that, a hollow, nervous sound, and pushed the door open. "Goodbye, Zora," he said, not even looking at her. "Find your own way home." The heavy ballroom door swung shut behind her, with a deep, final click. Zora stood alone in the hotel's grand corridor, the noise of the party muffled behind thick wood. She looked down at her hands, empty now, no orchid, no pot, no piece of her mother left. She did not cry. She did not call anyone screaming for help. She simply reached into her purse and dialed one number. Diane Cole picked up on the second ring. "Zora, what's wrong?" "I need you to come to the Georgian Terrace," Zora said, her voice steady and flat. "I'm on my way," Diane said immediately, no questions asked, already grabbing her car keys. 11 minutes later, a black Mercedes pulled up outside the hotel entrance. Diane Cole stepped out wearing a sharp gray suit, her heels clicking fast against the pavement. She found Zora sitting quietly on a bench near the lobby fountain, hands folded in her lap. "What happened?" Diane asked, crouching down to Zora's eye level. Zora told her everything, in short, calm sentences, like she was reading a grocery list. Diane's expression did not change much, but her knuckles whitened around her phone. "The orchid your mother gave you?" she asked quietly. "The Star of Assam?" Zora nodded once. "He stepped on it, in front of everyone." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and squeezed Zora's hand. "You don't have to explain anything else tonight," Diane said. "Let's get you home." They walked together to the car, and Diane opened the door for her like always. Inside the Mercedes, the leather seats still smelled faintly of lavender air freshener. Zora stared out the window as the hotel's golden lights shrank behind them. "I was going to tell him tonight," she said quietly. "Everything. My father, the company, all of it." Diane glanced at her. "Maybe it's good you didn't." The next morning, Zora sat across from her father in his downtown office on the 41st floor. Richard Bennett was 63 years old, silver-haired, with hands still rough from decades of shipping work. He listened without interrupting, as Zora described the party, her voice calm but tired. When she finished, he did not shout or slam his desk. He simply folded his hands and asked one quiet question. "What do you want to do now?" Zora thought about it for a long moment before answering. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I want him to understand what he threw away. And if understanding costs him everything he has," her father asked. Zora looked down at her hands. Then maybe that's the lesson he needed. Diane, sitting in the corner, with a folder, cleared her throat. "There's something you should both know," she said. "Julian Mercer has debt problems." She explained that Julian owed money across 3 credit cards, nearly $31,000 total. He had also asked Preston Locke's investment group for a loan just 2 weeks earlier. The loan was meant to cover a real estate deal that had already fallen through. He told them the deal was still active, Diane said. "It closed 6 weeks ago." He lied. Richard leaned back in his chair, considering this new information carefully. "Preston Locke's group manages part of our shipping fund," he said slowly. Zora looked up, surprised. "You know Preston?" "I know of him," Richard said. and I know he values his reputation more than anything else." Later that same week, Zora sat alone in her apartment, staring at the empty spot on her windowsill. The orchid had always lived there, catching morning light every single day for years. Now there was only a faint ring of dust where the ceramic pot used to sit. She thought about calling Julian back, hearing his voice, letting him explain himself. Instead, she opened a small wooden box she kept in her closet. Inside was a photograph of her mother, smiling on the deck of an old cargo ship. "I wasn't ready to lose you again," Zora whispered to the photograph. "Not like that." She closed the box gently and made a decision that surprised even herself. She would not hide anymore, not out of fear and not out of habit either. A plan began to form, quiet and careful, over the next several days. Zora did not want a public spectacle. She wanted the truth to simply arrive on its own. Diane arranged a meeting with Preston Locke's investment group, using the Bennett Pacific account as the reason. She did not mention Zora's connection to Julian at all, not yet. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at Preston's office on West Peachtree Street. Before that meeting, Zora sat down with the Bennett Pacific board, most of them older men her father trusted. One board member, a soft-spoken woman named Carol Whitfield, had known Zora since childhood. "You don't need our permission to live your life," Carol said gently, during a quiet moment after the meeting. "I know," Zora answered, "but I wanted you to hear the truth from me first." Carol reached over and patted her hand. "That plant your mother gave you meant something to all of us, too." Zora felt her throat tighten, but she nodded and kept her composure steady. "We watched your mother carry cuttings from that same orchid onto 3 different ships," Carol said, smiling faintly. "She always said something beautiful could survive anywhere, as long as someone cared enough to carry it." Zora had never heard that story before, and it settled somewhere deep inside her chest. For the first time since the party, she felt something besides sadness sitting in that same space. She felt a quiet, steady kind of resolve, the kind her mother might have recognized instantly. The following Monday, Zora went to work, as usual, saying nothing to her co-workers about the weekend. Her manager, a kind woman named Patricia, noticed she seemed quieter than normal. "Rough weekend?" Patricia asked, setting a cup of coffee on Zora's desk. "Something like that," Zora said, managing a small smile. "I'll be okay." Patricia did not push further, simply patting her shoulder before walking away. Zora spent the day answering emails, grateful for the ordinary rhythm of small tasks. That evening, she visited her father's house instead of going straight home. Richard Bennett lived alone in a modest brick house, despite owning a company worth billions. He had never cared much for mansions, preferring a quiet street with old oak trees. When Zora arrived, he was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. "You look like your mother did the day she told me she was leaving the family shipping firm in Greece," he said. "Steady, sad, but somehow still standing straight," he added, studying his daughter's face carefully. Zora sat down beside him, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. Neither of them said much else that evening, and neither of them needed to. Meanwhile, Julian's world was quietly falling apart in small, painful pieces. His landlord called about late rent, $800 behind for the second month straight. His credit card company sent a letter about a missed minimum payment of $219. Worse, Preston Locke had not returned his calls in 5 days. Julian told himself it was nothing, just a busy week, nothing to worry about. He tried calling Zora 3 times that week. She did not answer. He told his friends she probably needed space, that she would come around eventually. Deep down, a small, uncomfortable feeling had started to grow in his chest. He remembered the way she never argued, never raised her voice, never fought back. Somehow, that silence bothered him more than any argument ever could have. On Thursday morning, Diane Cole walked into Preston Locke's office building downtown. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh paint, and cold coffee left too long on a warm burner. She carried a leather folder containing Bennett Pacific's quarterly shipping contracts. Preston greeted her warmly, unaware of anything unusual about the meeting. "Diane, always a pleasure," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Please sit." They discussed shipping fund numbers for nearly 20 minutes, routine and calm. Near the end, Diane closed her folder and looked directly at Preston. I understand your group was approached recently by a man named Julian Mercer, she said. Preston's smile faltered slightly. You know Mercer? I know he humiliated someone very close to the Bennett family, Diane said evenly. Preston's face went through several expressions in just a few seconds. Confusion first, then a slow, dawning realization, then something close to panic. The woman at his birthday party, Preston said quietly. Zora. She's Richard Bennett's daughter, Diane finished for him. Heir to Bennett Pacific Shipping. Preston set down his coffee cup, his hand not quite steady. I laughed at her dress, Preston said, mostly to himself, his voice suddenly hollow. You did more than that, Diane said. You watched a man destroy her mother's memory in public. Preston's throat felt tight. He swallowed hard before speaking again. What does the Bennett family want from us? He asked carefully. Nothing from you, Diane said. But I'd reconsider any loan requests from Julian Mercer. Preston nodded slowly, already reaching for his phone with a shaking hand. He would deny Julian's loan that same afternoon, citing insufficient business justification in the paperwork. He would also mention, quietly, to two other investors, exactly who Julian had humiliated. Word moves fast in small circles of powerful people who all know each other. By Friday evening, 3 different men had heard the story, each version a little worse than the last. One of Julian's old college friends, a man named Trevor, still tried calling him during that stretch. People are talking, Trevor warned him, over the phone. You should probably say something publicly. Say what? Julian snapped. That I stepped on a plant? It sounds ridiculous out loud. It sounds ridiculous, because it was, Trevor said flatly. That's kind of the point. Julian hung up, without responding, staring at the ceiling of his cousin's spare room. He wasn't ready, yet to admit how small the moment had actually made him look. Julian felt the change before he understood it. His usual lunch invitations from the investment club stopped coming entirely. A colleague mentioned, almost too casually, hearing something about a shipping heiress and a broken plant. Julian's stomach dropped, cold and sudden, like stepping onto ice that wasn't there. He tried to laugh it off. That's not related to me, he said. Nobody laughed with him. That weekend, Julian searched Zora's name online for the first time in 18 months. He had never bothered before, comfortable simply loving the woman in front of him. Now, his fingers trembled slightly as he typed Zora Bennett into the search bar. The first result was a photograph from a company gala, 3 years old. She stood beside her father, wearing a deep blue gown, a small gold nameplate reading Bennett Pacific Shipping behind them. Julian stared at the screen for a long, silent minute. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow, like the air itself had thinned. He scrolled further and found an article listing Bennett Pacific's value at $3.7 billion. His hands went cold. His mouth went dry. He had crushed a 9-year-old orchid belonging to a billionaire's daughter, in front of investors he desperately wanted to impress. He called Zora 4 times that night. She did not answer once. He sent a long text message, apologizing, begging, explaining he had been stressed about money. He mentioned the party, the plant, the harsh words, all of it, spilling out in broken sentences. Zora read the message the next morning, sitting alone at her small kitchen table. She did not reply. Not yet. She wasn't ready. 2 weeks passed. Julian's financial situation grew worse by the day. His real estate firm let him go after a client complained about a missed deadline. Without his salary, he could not cover rent, credit cards, or his car payment. He moved out of his apartment and into his cousin's spare bedroom in Decatur. Everything he had built his image around began quietly crumbling behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Zora began stepping back into her real name, slowly, carefully. She started attending Bennett Pacific board meetings again, something she had avoided for years. Her father watched her walk into the boardroom wearing a simple navy suit, calm and steady. You look ready, he said, smiling for the first time in weeks. I feel ready, Zora answered. I just needed time to remember who I am. She used part of her personal savings, not company money, to fund something new. She purchased a small greenhouse space near Piedmont Park, just under 2,000 square feet. She called it the Assam Garden, planning to grow rare orchids and donate them to local hospitals. It was, in her own quiet way, a memorial to her mother that no one could ever crush again. Diane helped her file the paperwork, smiling as she watched Zora build something entirely her own. News of the small garden project spread through local Atlanta papers within a month. A reporter, digging deeper, discovered the connection between Zora Hale and Zora Bennett. The story broke gently at first, then grew larger across social media within days. Shipping heiress builds secret garden. After public humiliation, read one widely shared headline. Comment sections filled with strangers defending her, sharing their own stories of being underestimated. Julian read the article from his cousin's spare bedroom, phone shaking slightly in his hand. He saw the photograph included, with the story, the crushed orchid pot, the green dress. Someone at the party had taken a picture that night, and it had finally surfaced. The comments underneath were brutal, hundreds of strangers calling him cruel, shallow, and small. His name was tagged directly. There was no hiding from it anymore. His mother called him crying, asking why he never mentioned any of this to her. His father, the former hotel manager, said only one sentence before hanging up. "You spent your whole life chasing people who'd step on you the same way." Julian sat alone in a borrowed room, staring at a phone full of strangers' anger. His cousin Marcus knocked on the door that night, holding 2 cans of soda. "You want to talk about it?" Marcus asked, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Julian shook his head at first, then changed his mind, the words spilling out anyway. He described the party, the orchid, the way Preston Locke had laughed at her dress. Marcus listened without interrupting, cracking open his soda only when Julian finally stopped talking. "You know what's strange?" Marcus said. "You never once mentioned her last name to any of us." "I didn't think it mattered," Julian admitted quietly. "I didn't think much about her at all, honestly." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's usually how people end up losing something worth keeping." For the first time in years, Julian had absolutely nothing left to perform for anyone. He decided to see her one final time, uninvited, showing up outside the Assam Garden. Construction workers were finishing the greenhouse frame, glass panels catching the afternoon sun. Zora stood near the entrance, reviewing blueprints with a contractor, when she noticed him approaching. Diane, standing nearby, stepped forward immediately, but Zora raised a hand to stop her. "It's fine," Zora said quietly. "Let him speak." Julian looked thinner than she remembered, his usual confident posture completely gone. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I just needed to say it." "Say what, Julian?" Zora asked, her tone calm, neither warm nor cold. "I destroyed something I can never replace," he said. "And I did it for people who don't even remember my name now." Zora was quiet for a long moment, watching the glass panels reflect the sunlight. "You didn't destroy my mother's memory," she finally said. "You destroyed one small piece of it. That should be enough for me to hate you," she continued. "But I don't have room for that." Julian's eyes filled, and his voice came out rough and uneven. "So what now? Now you live with what you did," Zora said simply. "The same way I live with what I lost." She turned back toward the greenhouse, done with the conversation, done with him entirely. Julian did not chase after her. He simply stood there, watching her walk away. For the first time, he understood that some doors, once closed, do not open again. He eventually took a job at a moving company, lifting boxes for $13 an hour. It was honest work, humble work, the kind of work he had once looked down on. Slowly, quietly, he began learning the lesson Zora had never needed to teach him directly. At the moving company, Julian worked alongside a man named Gerald, who had done the job for 11 years. Gerald noticed Julian flinch whenever customers treated him like he was invisible. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Gerald said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Being the guy nobody bothers to look at," Julian said quietly. "Yeah, it does." Gerald nodded slowly. "Some folks never learn that lesson until it's too late." Julian carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs and said nothing else that day. Months passed, and Julian slowly built a smaller, steadier version of his old life. He rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta, paying his own rent on time. He stopped chasing investment clubs and expensive dinners he could not truly afford. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about the orchid and the sound it made when it broke. He never reached out to Zora again. After that final conversation at the greenhouse, he understood, finally, that some apologies only mean something when nothing is asked in return. 6 months later, the Assam Garden held its opening day, filled with donated orchids and soft classical music. Local hospital patients came for free tours, walking slowly among rows of rare, blooming flowers. Richard Bennett stood proudly at the entrance, watching his daughter greet every single visitor personally. Diane stood beside him, arms crossed, a small, satisfied smile on her face. "She built this from nothing," Richard said quietly. "Just like her mother would have wanted." Zora walked through rows of orchids, stopping occasionally to answer questions from curious visitors. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, tugged her mother's sleeve near a display of white flowers. "Mommy, look, it's the same flower from the news story," the girl said, pointing excitedly. Zora smiled and knelt down beside her. "This one is called a Star of Assam," she said gently. "It was my mother's favorite flower. Now it gets to be everyone's favorite, too." Later that evening, after the crowds had gone, Zora stood alone in the quiet greenhouse. The soft hum of the climate control system filled the empty space around her. She touched one white petal gently, thinking of her mother, thinking of everything the past year had taught her. She had not needed Julian's love to know her own worth. She had simply needed time, patience, and one small, stubborn flower to prove it. Somewhere across the city, Julian Mercer clocked out of his shift at the moving company. He walked past a newsstand and saw Zora's photograph again, smiling among rows of orchids. He did not stop to look for long. He simply kept walking, carrying his own weight now. Some lessons only fully arrive after everything else has already been lost. A year after the party, the Assam Garden opened a second, larger greenhouse near the original site. Zora funded it partly through donations from strangers who had read her story online. One donation, small but specific, arrived anonymously for exactly $41. A handwritten note came with it, and signed, "Reading only." For the flower, that started it all. Diane noticed the postmark traced back to East Atlanta, but she never mentioned it to Zora. Some things, she decided, were better left as quiet, unclaimed kindness. Richard Bennett eventually stepped back from daily operations, letting Zora take a larger role at Bennett Pacific. She kept her office simple, one framed photograph of her mother on cargo ship number 4. Visitors often assumed the modest office belonged to someone junior, not the company's incoming president. Zora never bothered correcting them right away, letting the truth arrive in its own quiet time. She had learned, after everything, that the loudest people rarely carried the deepest worth. Sometimes the softest voice in the room understood the most. Diane Cole retired 2 years later, handing her role to a younger lawyer she had personally trained. At her small retirement gathering, held inside the Assam Garden's second greenhouse, Zora gave a short toast. "Diane came running the second I called," Zora said, raising her glass. She never once asked why. "That's what family does," Diane said simply, smiling through the applause around her. Outside, rows of orchids bloomed quietly under soft evening light, unaware of their own small significance. Each flower carried a story most visitors would never fully know, patient and steady, exactly like Zora herself. And some flowers, once crushed, find a way to bloom again anyway, stronger than before.